بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So we have reached the third hikmah of the Al-Ḥikam al-Aṭā'iyya. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefit us from these very special words that came from such an enlightened heart. And may that it penetrate our hearts, and may that it be a means for us to be in a state that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala place barakah in this time that we, inshallah ta'ala, spend together, and a barakah that translates into the increase in every aspect of our life, inwardly and outwardly. The third hikmah states, sawabiq al-himam la takhriqu aswar al-aqdar. So this is translated as antecedent intentions, and I prefer to say lofty spiritual aspiration cannot pierce the walls of predestined decrees. So this is a short hikmah, it's a short aphorism. And I was thinking, we might be able to cover this a little bit quicker than the two preceding ones. But even though that it's brief, you start to realize that the meanings are that many, they're abundant. And so today we wanted to first discuss what is taken as a given with this hadith. And this hadith centers around himma, even though it's in the plural, himam, which are multiple instances of your spiritual aspiration. And so we'll just translate himma as spiritual aspiration. It could also be translated as spiritual ambition, or maybe even in other ways. But himma is spiritual aspiration. And remember, in the previous aphorism, there was a mentioning that you're wanting to be in the means when Allah has taken you outside of the means, is that coming down from a himma aliyya, a lofty aspiration. So he's going to, and that precedes this particular aphorism for a wisdom that we will see, inshallah ta'ala. So, sawabiq al-himam la takhriqu aswar al-aqdar. Lofty spiritual aspiration cannot pierce the walls of predestined decrees. So we must first understand the importance of spiritual aspiration. This is taken as a given. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf, فَخُذْهَا بِقُوَّةٍ وَأْمُرْ قَوْمَكَ يَأْخُذُوا بِأَحْسَنِهَا. Hold on to them firmly and urge your people to hold fast to their excellent teachings. Allah also says in Surah Maryam about the Prophet Yahya alayhi salam, Ya Yahya, خُذُ الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ. That, O Yahya, that hold on to the scripture firmly. So this relates to aspiration, and that everything that we do by working hard and striving and struggling, all of which stem from high spiritual aspiration. And then there's a hadith related by Imam al-Tabarani in al-Awsat, Inna Allah azza wa jal yuhibbu ma'ali al-umur. That Allah azza wa jal loves lofty matters. وَيَكْرَهُ سَفْسَافَهَا. And He dislikes lowly ones. Allah loves lofty matters. And the commentators say about this, these are the akhlaq wal-khisal ad-diniyah. All of the various traits and that virtue, all of the various religious traits and virtues. This is essentially what is meant. And that it's interesting to note, and we'll come back to this as well, is that no matter what it is that you do for a worldly purpose, if it's solely for a worldly purpose, and you don't include some other type of intention to make it for the hereafter, even if you spend that 80% of your time doing it, it's considered to be lowly. All aspiration that is restricted to this world, even if you work extremely hard, in this context of the spiritual path, is considered to be lowly. Now, we already talked about last time, the importance of a livelihood and that type of thing. So it doesn't mean that we don't. But talking about that aspiration and the true meaning of the word spiritually, it has to be something connected to the religion. And then in a longer hadith in Al-Bukhari, I'll just quote parts of it, is that our Prophet said, "Man amana billahi wa bi rasulih." Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, whoever believes in Allah and His Messenger and establishes the prayer and fasts Ramadan, kana haqqan ala Allah an yudkhiluhu al-jannah, is that Allah will surely enter him into paradise out of His bounty. And then that it goes on to say, "Jahada fi sabilillah aw jalasa fi ardihi allati wulida fiha," that whether he that does jihad for the sake of Allah Ta'ala or sits that in the place where he is from. And then that they said, "Afala nubashshir an-nas?" Should we not tell people about this and give them glad tidings, O Messenger of Allah? And then the Prophet ﷺ went on to say, "Inna fil jannah miyata daraja." Indeed, in paradise there's 100 degrees. أعدها الله للمجاهدين في سبيل الله ما بين درجتين كما بين السماء والأرض. For those that uphold this true meaning of jihad for the sake of Allah, between each degree is the distance between the heavens and the earth. And then the Prophet said, فَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُ اللَّهِ فَسَأَلُوهُ الْفِرْدَوْسِ. If you ask Allah, ask Him for Firdaus, the highest level in paradise. In other words, our Prophet is teaching us to ask Allah Ta'ala for lofty things, lofty degrees. He wants us to that strive towards what is best, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the hadith goes on. And so that spiritual aspiration is key. And it's one of the foundations of the spiritual path. And now we want to look at it linguistically. And normally we would do this when we talk about the linguistic breakdown, but we'll come back to that here. We're going to focus on this word a little bit before we get into the linguistic breakdown of some of the other words of the aphorism. That the word himma in Arabic comes from a root, hamma yuhummu. And the two verbal nouns are hamman wa mahamma. And this contains a number of different meanings. It could be to intend to do something, to plan to do something. So in that sense, it's like similar to intention. It could be like on the point of doing something. You're just about to do something. Just as it could that relate to that you're being concerned about something. And then it has a meaning that is less positive. It's to distress or to worry. And so the word hem could be huzn, like sadness, or it could be that what you intend to do and have resolve for. But then we get to the word himma, loghatan in the Arabic language, you could simply say that it's al-azm al-qawi, is to have strong resolution. What is himma? Strong resolution. And we all know what that means. You set out to do something, and you do something with, you give it your all. And then we defined it last week as قوة انبعاث النفس إلى مقصود ما. That strong motivation of the soul towards some type of goal. And so a more comprehensive definition of what we specifically mean by himma in the spiritual sense, in the spiritual path, is اجتماع القوة الظاهرة والباطنة على تحقيق الهدف. This is himma. Is it where you gather all of your outward and your inner strength and direct it towards realizing a particular goal, seeking a particular goal. That's what himma is. And of course, there's a lot of implications there about what goes along with himma. So, one of the scholars has said about this, al-himmatu a'azzu shay wada'ahu Allah subhanahu fil insan. That this is the himma, spiritual aspiration, is the most noble thing that Allah has placed in the human being. And there's two signs that the scholar gives that it's truly present and that it is as it should be. And the first is that when you set out to do something, you are determined to achieve what it is that you set out to do. So determination. And the second is everything that it is that you do is only directed towards your particular goal. So it's very closely related to sidq, truthfulness. So you're determined and you're focused. You direct all of your energy towards your specific goal. So if someone has aspiration, they're dedicated, day in and day out. They're not distracted. You won't get very far if you get distracted in things. And again, you see how these spiritual principles could be applied to every other aspect of your life. That's why if you understand the spiritual path, you will be better at everything that you do in life. If you understand the prayer and you give it its right, you'll be better at everything that you do in life. And so this notion of this religion not being relevant is just completely ridiculous. If you have religion and you're learning it properly and implementing it properly, it will make you a better person in every other aspect of your life. It will lead to success in every other aspect of your life. True success. So, that himma can be divided into that high himma and low himma. So, high spiritual aspiration is to seek closeness to Allah, to attain any of the religious virtues. And that low himma is to seek something of this world. And there's something very interesting that the scholars say about this. And this is something we need to remind ourselves of, because we live in a time where people have ta'aleem of the people of dunya. And this has always been the case, where people are exalting the people of this world, but especially in our time. And whereas the scholars who came before us, they said, is that the people of deen in the hereafter, ينبغي أن يرفع هممهم وينزهون أنفسهم عن الركون إلى الدنيا. We should lift our aspirations from leaning towards the things of this world. وَيَسْتَقْبِهُ وَيَسْتَقْثِرُ جَمِيعَ شَهْوَاتِ الدُّنْيَا. That we should see the desires of this world as something that is gross and ugly. Because they're ladhat faniya. They're perishing desires. And there's this beautiful story that this scholar mentions, Imam al-Haddad, and he quotes Imam al-Yafi'i. And he says one time that there was this wazir, so this minister, and he came out and he's with this procession of people. And you can imagine the retinue and all these people around him. And he's wearing nice clothing and on his riding beast. So I'm painting the picture using poetic license here. And then the people start looking like, who is that? Who's that? Right? Isn't that right? When we see like a procession, we want to know who that is. Oh, who's the one? Oh, who's coming on? Right? All these things. Oh, that this person's hosting this person. Let's listen to the interview. What are they talking about? Oh, they're going to tell us some nitty gritty about people that, right? People just like يستعظمون ما هو فيه, like just exalting this particular individual. So then this lady who was standing on the side of the road, is that she said that إِلَى كَمْ تَقُولُونَ مَنْ هَذَا? How long are you going to ask the question, who is this? She says, هَذَا عَبْدٌ سَقَطَ مِنْ عَيْنِ اللَّهِ فَابْتَلَاهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بِمَا تَرَوْنَ. This is a servant that's fallen from the eye of God. And so Allah has tried him with what you see. That's the perspective of people of deen. They see people who've been given dunya, in position, in fame, in fortune, in large homes, and people obeying them, in watches and gold and silver and money, and everything that goes along with that. Whether they be athletes or whether they be politicians or whether they be businessmen, whatever. That should be our perspective. And if you're going to watch a game, you watch a game. Okay, it's sports. But protect your heart from glorifying something you're not supposed to glorify. From being internally and desiring something that you shouldn't desire. So the beautiful thing about himma is that it's something that you can acquire. It's called iktisab al-himma. And the first step towards it is that knowing the greatness of what it is that you're seeking. And this is, of course, when it relates to something that is religious, whether it's a part of the spiritual path or indirectly a part of the spiritual path by way of intention. And then that bringing to mind that how it is that you're going to use all of your energy to attain what it is that you are seeking. And then the third dimension of it is taking the means to the extent possible and devoting yourself to it with focus. And one of the beautiful things that Habib Ali Jifri said some time ago is that he looked at 3 different Arabic words, muhimma, ham, and himma. They all come from the same root. And so your muhimma is your duty, your hem is your concern, and your himma is, as we mentioned, your aspiration. And he related them together. And he said, to the extent that we understand our duty, our muhimma, will be to the extent that we have concern, hem. To the extent that we have concern, will be to the extent that we have himma. To the extent that we have aspiration, himma, will be to the extent that we fulfill the duty for which we were created. So we have to have fiqh of our muhimma. What have we been created for? What are we here for? And then we have to have concern that develops as a result. And then that will lead to aspiration to actually do what it is that we can do. Now, one of the other thing that's really important that we're going to talk about himma here before we transition into the meaning of the aphorism is that you will notice that himma, similar to what we mentioned about sidq. Sidq is like a sword that cuts everything that's in your way and allows you to achieve what it is that you're seeking. And himma, spiritual aspiration, is similar. And oftentimes you'll find when you have really high aspiration, things are facilitated for you fairly easily. What are called infialat fi shu'un al-kawn. Things just tend to happen around you in creation from the blessing of your spiritual aspiration. And there's a statement of Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz that says that inni ma hamamtu bi shay illa adraktu. Never did it cross my mind to achieve something except that I achieved it. Hatta inni hamamtu bil khilafa wa niltaha. To the extent that it crossed my mind to that become a caliph and that I achieved this. But then Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz realized, and he died very early, that there was something much greater than this. And then he left all of that for the sake of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and is from the elect of those who tread the spiritual path. That's why he's the 6th rightly guided caliph. Usually we say 5, but the 5th was Sayyidina Hassan. The 6th is that Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz. And so that this indicates to us that when you direct your intention towards a particular matter and you truthfully embark upon a path to attain what it is that you've set out to attain, is that Allah facilitates things for you. And this is why some of the righteous have said that himma is the supreme name of Allah. Just as, and what is meant by that is like just like if you call upon the Ism Allah al-Azam, the greatest name of Allah, you receive what you that ask for immediately. And likewise, himma is like this. When you have high spiritual aspiration, you oftentimes receive what it is that you set out to achieve. And there's also another statement that says, Himam rijal tuhud al-jibal. The aspirations of men move mountains. Okay, so you can start to see now why he had to mention this as the third aphorism. Okay, the very first aphorism was training us not to rely on our deeds. The second aphorism was about being content with where Allah places us and not choosing that something that Allah Ta'ala does not want for us. And so now naturally that when that you only want what Allah wants, you have high spiritual aspiration because we wanted to make sure that was understood and that was taken as a given. And that you start achieving things in the spiritual path. Doors start to open up for you. You now need to be very careful and to remind yourself that just as you're supposed to act but not rely upon your act, and just as you're supposed to that be content with what Allah, where He's placed you, you don't also want to rely upon your aspiration or think that it's actually doing anything for you. But you have to have aspiration. So it's very subtle. And this aphorism is paving the way for the next one, which is about tadbir, management. In other words, is that if you come to the conclusion that, yes, I need to have high spiritual aspiration, but it's not my aspiration that's making things happen, it's the decree of Allah, then you also need to have the same etiquette when you talk about management of affairs. So let's look at the words in this aphorism. The first is sawabiq. Sawabiq al-himam. Okay, so sawabiq is the plural of sabiqa. And so this comes from a root sabaqa yasbiqu sabqan. And it means to that come first. Okay, or to beat someone in a race. But it also means that surpass someone in good traits. So here the word sawabiq primarily relates to high spiritual aspiration, lofty aspirations. Okay, and so he translated it as antecedent intentions. I think it's better, based upon what many of the commentators say, is that to translate as lofty spiritual aspiration. And so what he's hinting there is that there's different types of aspiration. There's low aspiration, there's high aspiration, there's kind of a mid-range of aspiration. And even though it's in the idafa construct, sawabiq al-himam, is that this is a particular type of idafa. It's idafat al-sifa al-mawsuf. So that it's essentially, the sawabiq is describing the type of himam, i.e. the highest degree of aspiration. And so that, again, it's assumed here that the people treading the path have this high aspiration, and that there are things that are going to happen as a result. So he wants us to note here that it la takhruk, okay, is that it doesn't pierce. So kharaqa yakhriqu tanfudh biquwwa. It's to pierce. It can also mean to like tear, but here to pierce. And then we have the word aswar, the plural of which is, the singular which is sur. A sur is a wall or a fence or some type of enclosure. And it's used in this very beautiful sense here, is that it's as if we're enclosed by the predestined decrees. You can't go beyond that. If something is decreed, it's decreed. And then, of course, the word aqdar is the plural of qadr. And the qadara yaqduru is to decree, or qadara yaqdiru qudratan is to have power over. Okay, so aswar al-aqdar, the walls of predestined decrees. So what the Shaykh is telling us here is that when someone has this lofty spiritual aspiration, they could erroneously think that somehow they're doing something, or that it could lead them to think that whatever is that in their doing something, that somehow it's not a part of the divine decree. Everything is part of the divine decree. And so that he wants us to be aware of this. And one of the other proofs that this could happen. So if someone's wondering, like, wait, what do you mean that when someone has this lofty aspiration that things happen for them? One of the examples that the commentators mention is the hadith in Sahih Muslim. رُبَّ أَشْعَثْ مَدْفُوءً بِالْأَبْوَابِ. And there's different narrations, but this is narration of Muslim. Is that how many a disheveled person, madfu' bil abwab, he's pushed away at the door. I mean, no one invites him anymore. No one wants him to be present with them. لو أقسم على الله لأبره. And this could have one of two meanings. I.e., were he to swear that wallahi, such and such a thing is going to happen, Allah would honor him ikramin lahu, to make that thing happen. And of course, this is all a part of the divine decree. Or the other meaning is that this individual makes dua and Allah answers his dua, and you see the trace of the dua being answered in the world. This is a hadith. لو أقسم على الله لأبره. And that's what the commentators say. And that Ibn Ajiba mentions in his commentary that his sheikh said to him is that there are men, true men of Allah, is that إِذَا اهْتَمُّوا بِشَيْءٍ, when they direct their concern towards something, كَانَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, those things happen by the power of Allah. So nothing's happening outside the power of Allah. But there's certain people that are like that. Is that they that move towards something, Allah honors that movement in their heart, that himma and aspiration that they have, that concern that they have towards something, and causes it to happen. So if you're experiencing this, you have to have adab. And thus, al-himam al-sawabiq, these lofty aspirations, la takhriq aswar al-aqdar, is that they do not pierce the walls of predestined decrees. And that Ibn Ajiba also says that the arif billah, or the murid, the one who knows Allah, or the one treading the path, is that if they become concerned with a matter and their spiritual aspiration becomes strong, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that blesses things to happen for them through His power, tabaraka wa ta'ala. And that Mulay Arabi al-Darqawi that used to say that murid as-sadiq is someone who is sincerely seeking closeness to Allah. إذا كان فانيا في الاسم مهما اهتم بشيء كان وإن كان فانيا في الذات, that even that if when he reaches the point where he is annihilated in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that what he has to do, that thing happens, that قبل أن يهتم به أو كلام هذا معناه, is that before they actually do anything, by just having the aspiration in their heart, Allah makes it happen. And these are realities, and these are means. So don't think that this is anything funny here. The means is that high aspiration of someone who is annihilated in the remembrance of Allah and taking the spiritual path seriously and has a lofty state with Allah. By virtue of their directing their himma towards something, Allah causes things to happen. So it also tells you a little bit about the secret of da'wah to Allah, of calling people to Allah. The asl of da'wah is nur. The foundation of calling people to Allah is light. That Imam Abdullah bin Abi al-Haddad, who they refer to as the qutb al-da'wah wa irshad, is that outwardly Allah took his physical sight, although he had spiritual insight. And he didn't travel outward to too many places, but his books are on the corners of the earth. His invocations are recited in the four corners of the earth and ever in between. And this is the way these true people are. That blessed people like Sheikh Muhammad bin Habib, who said that his diwan was going to spread all over. It's recited from the far west to the far east and from the north to the south and places in between. These are Mubarak people that Allah places blessing. And no greater example is that than the example of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 1400 plus years. And look at the people still. I'm not talking about the dysfunctionality in the Muslim world and all of that stuff. Leave that aside for now. And look at all of the blessed people that are still preserving the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's still being preserved as a whole. And the ummah as a whole is protected and preserved. All of the different sunnahs, even though that they might not all exist in one person, there's different degrees to which people reflect the sunnah of our Prophet, but it's still being preserved. So that this is also indicated in a hadith Qudsi, these scholars say, is that kuntu fa'idha hababtuhu, when I come to love him, kuntu sam'uhu alladhi yasma'u bih, wa basaruhu alladhi yubsiru bih, I will be the hearing through which he hears and the eye through which he sees. In other words, is that person only wants what Allah wants. And when that person wants it, is that it happens from the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's one of the meanings, one of the interpretations, the scholars say, of that hadith Qudsi. So what's important to remember then when you're in the spiritual path is that none of that is that disconnected from the divine decree. It's all a part of the divine decree. Is that nothing's going to happen except what Allah has willed will happen. Now, and then he mentions something else very beautiful here, Ibn Ajib. He says, so that if the spiritual aspiration of the one who knows Allah is directed towards something, and that if that it's facilitated, then he sees as being from the decree of Allah Ta'ala. And then if it doesn't happen, then he's in a state of adab, having manners with Allah Ta'ala. And he returns to his true description, which is one of ubudiyya, being a servant of Allah Ta'ala. So they don't get sad. They're disconnected from the way that things that we're normally connected to. They don't get sad. They don't get bothered. Is that on top of that, actually, that find joy in that prevention. And because they can then that have that trait of being a servant of Allah Ta'ala. That's a very fine, subtle point. And it's also understood, they point out, that when he speaks about these sawabiq al-himam, these lofty aspirations, that the other degrees of aspiration, like if someone's of low aspiration, and so let's just think of it now in terms of the strength of the aspiration, not like in terms of whether you're seeking something of the afterlife or or religious or something of the world. But people have different degrees of aspiration. And if you have a low degree of aspiration, is that it doesn't lead to much change outwardly. It doesn't lead to a lot of action outwardly if it's weak. And when it moves up in the degree where it's like kind of like a middle degree, okay, then you might actually be able to do certain things. You might actually have certain things happen. You might be able to accomplish things. But if you really want to that resemble the people who are treading the path of getting close to Allah, we have to have high aspiration and lofty spiritual aspirations. Knowing all along that nothing is going to happen except that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills will happen. So, in summary, that what we are being taught here is to believe that your spiritual aspirations, the individual instances of it, they're asbab, they're means. Remember we talked about asbab? Means of achieving something. Asbab adiyya. These are means that this is what happens when you get this. This normally happens, but it only happens by the power of Allah. La ta'thir laha. They don't actually bring about any change or cause anything to happen in reality. That can only happen by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can see how aqidah, belief in creed, relates to the spiritual path. Everything that happens ultimately then is from the divine decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this is what they say, is that it teaches us the lesson that things are not in our hands. And that's a lesson that we need to learn. And people of outward means who have money, who are self-sufficient, they think that they're in control with all of the things that they have, need to learn that lesson as well. But also people in the spiritual path. As that when things start to happen, you have to be careful. Because these are very serious slips that Allah could strip, nasallahu ta'ala salam al afiyah, whatever it is that you have achieved, that it could strip it from you as a result of your bad adab. So that then they mentioned that this aphorism was placed here because this is the next etiquette that we have to learn. Not only do we want to be content with where Allah places us, as we've already mentioned, we also need to recognize, even with our high spiritual aspiration, it's not the aspiration. You have to do it and have it. But ultimately, that Allah Ta'ala is the one that is guiding you to where you need to be guided. And so this is the case with our aspiration, just as this is the case when it comes to managing all of our different affairs, which is what, inshallah ta'ala, we will speak about next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and open up these meanings to us and bless us to understand them and to put them into practice in a way that is pleasing to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. May we have kamala tamassuk bi sunnati Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and firmly adhere to the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to may Allah fill our hearts with love of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, love of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to bless all of our states to be states that are pleasing to Him, and to forgive us and to bless us in the month of Rajab and Sha'ban, and cause us to meet Ramadan, Ya Arhamar Rahmeen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.